Sex abuse crisis. Another case of alleged misconduct by a bishop comes to light. We have a report from Rome. Protecting life. Pro-life groups react after the head of a U.S. agency says he's in favor of using fetal tissue. Farewell to Washington. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan addresses his colleagues as he prepares to leave Congress. We look back at the Catholic lawmaker's career. And a helping hand. The unlikely friendship between a former U.S. president and a child in the Philippines. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 19, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A new case puts the global clergy sex abuse crisis in the spotlight once again. Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a Los Angeles auxiliary bishop following allegations of misconduct with a minor. Bishop Alexander Salazar denies any wrongdoing. The alleged misconduct is said to have occurred in the 1990s, before Salazar was ordained a bishop when he was serving as a parish priest. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, what information has the Vatican released exactly?
Wyatt, the Vatican announced the resignation in a one-line statement. No explanation was provided, but the current Archbishop of Los Angeles is speaking out. Archbishop Jose Gomez says the Archdiocese was made aware of the claim in 2005. Gomez says prosecutors declined to bring charges, but the Archdiocese forwarded the complaint to the Vatican office that handles sex abuse cases, and that's the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and it imposed so-called precautionary measures against Salazar. A further investigation in Los Angeles by an independent review board found the allegation to be credible. Archbishop Gomez says Salazar has consistently denied any wrongdoing and the Archdiocese has received no other allegations against him. Gomez says that these decisions have been made out of deep concern for the healing and reconciliation of abuse victims and for the good of the Church.
Tell us more about Bishop Salazar's background.
Well, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says Salazar was born in Costa Rica and later moved with his family to the U.S. He was ordained a priest in 1984 and served in various parishes. Pope St. John Paul II appointed him auxiliary bishop in 2004. And at that time, Cardinal Roger Mahony was the Archbishop of Los Angeles. Mahony himself has been accused of covering up for abuse of priests and was barred from public ministry by Archbishop Gomez in 2013. However, as recently as this past November, he spoke publicly at the bishops' annual meeting in what was seen as a lecture to the current bishops on how to handle the current crisis.
And Juliet, as you know, this resignation is just the latest in a string of cases of alleged misconduct against Bishop. And as you know, they've thrown the church in America here in turmoil.
Indeed. Wyatt, in July, Pope Francis ordered Theodore McCarrick, the retired Archbishop of Washington, to a life of prayer and penance following allegations of abuse of a minor. And the Pope also accepted McCarrick's resignation from the College of Cardinals, although McCarrick remains an Archbishop. The scandal exposed loopholes in how the Church treats accusations of abuse against bishops, who are only answerable to the Pope. Now, bishops have largely escaped the same scrutiny as ordinary priests that are accused of misconduct. Wyatt, and until recently, they have rarely been sanctioned or removed for covering up for abusers.
Okay, we'll continue to follow this and see if the Vatican releases any more information. Juliet Lindley, Vatican correspondent for EWTN News Nightly. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And stay with EWTN News Nightly, as well as our partners, Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register, for continuing coverage of the abuse crisis. Bipartisan senators agreed to a stopgap measure preventing a government shutdown over Christmas. Once approved by the Senate, the bill goes next to the House. The short-term spending measure will continue funding the government until February 8th, avoiding the partial shutdown that was set to begin at midnight this Friday. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said it's good that President Trump is backing off his demand for Congress to pay for a border wall with Mexico. A major criminal justice reform bill passed the Senate with bipartisan support.
On this motion to concur in the House amendment with an amendment has been agreed to.
The proposal would ease sentences for non-violent offenders. It now heads to the House for approval. The U.S. bishops support the measure. Speaker Paul Ryan says goodbye to Capitol Hill. In his farewell address, he says the House is the most productive it's been in a generation, passing more than 1,000 bills. But he complains about America's broken political system. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi was there for the Speaker's words. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Speaker Ryan served here in the House for 2 decades. He led the chamber for the past 3 years. But for his farewell speech, he went across the street to the Library of Congress. He says if Congress deals with 3 very pressing issues, the country will have a great century. He says those 3 issues: fighting poverty, fixing the immigration system, and confronting the debt crisis. Today, he says to Americans, they can fix these problems.
Ryan's speakership nears its end.
We have taken on some of the biggest challenges of our time, and we have made a great and lasting difference in the trajectory of this country.
Today he touts his big wins, like Congress approving the biggest tax cuts in decades. He also outlined some of his pro-life victories at this year's March for Life.
We passed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which restricts abortion after 20 weeks. We passed the Conscience Protection Act, which ensures no one is forced to produce an abortion against his or her will.
The House also voted to repeal Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood, but those bills never got the votes needed to pass the Senate. He once told Lauren Ashburn about his pro-life views.
My favorite charity that I give every single year are pregnancy crisis centers.
Today, the 48-year-old Catholic admitted he never achieved long-time policy dreams, cutting spending on government's huge entitlement programs and controlling the growing national debt. He also faced criticism in April for firing the House chaplain.
I think the dismissal of Father Pat Conroy is a disgrace and is an outrage.
Ryan later reinstated Father Pat Conroy.
Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day.
First elected to Congress in 1998, Ryan was Mitt Romney's running mate in 2012. Now he says he's leaving office to spend time with his family.
You got to work hard around here at staying who you are. Insist on it. It's what I've been praying about literally every morning since I first came here, to keep my sense of self.
Speaker Ryan says he still doesn't know what's next in his life, but at the Catholic prayer breakfast this year, he says he still wants to be talking about Catholic social teaching, even if that happens at Coffee and Donuts at his parish in Wisconsin. I spoke to one retiring Republican, and he said Paul Ryan has a bright future. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. The Trump administration appears to be withdrawing all of the approximately 2,000 American troops in Syria. This morning, President Trump tweeted, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." His tweet follows a series of news reports that the U.S. was preparing to withdraw from the country. The U.S. first launched airstrikes against ISIS fighters in Syria in 2014. In the years that followed, the U.S. began partnering with Syrian ground forces. The Pentagon recently said that the terror group now controls just 1% of the territory they originally held. Pro-life groups are disturbed by remarks from a Trump administration official. Dr. Francis Collins is the director of the National Institutes of Health. He says fetal tissue research will continue despite growing concerns. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Those concerns involve taxpayer funding of scientific research that uses the body parts of aborted babies. A letter from national pro-life leaders will arrive here at the White House this week condemning the practice. Now, separately, some pro-lifers are calling on President Trump to fire Director Collins.
Dr. Francis Collins was appointed to run the National Institutes of Health by President Obama in 2009. President Trump made the decision last summer to keep Collins in that role. Now, some say it's time for a change.
We believe Dr. Collins should be removed from his post there at NIH.
Kristen Hawkins with the national group Students for Life is slamming Collins for his support of using aborted fetal tissue in scientific research. Last week, Director Collins said there is strong evidence that scientific benefits come from fetal tissue research, which can be done with an ethical framework. But Collins doesn't make the distinction between what is ethical and unethical. Hawkins believes his comments don't align with President Trump's pro-life convictions.
We're expecting the president to act. He is a pro-life president. He's promised us a pro-life administration. And look, Personnel is policy.
The NIH is an agency within the Department of Health and Human Services. In September, HHS announced an internal review of policies and procedures concerning the use of fetal tissue in research. Director Collins calls the department's plan to spend $20 million on research alternatives highly justified, but says fetal tissue research will continue to be a mainstay.
We've long expressed opposition to the use of aborted fetal tissue in research.
Greg Schleppenbach with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says aborted babies are used as commodities, potentially fueling the abortion business. He says there are plenty of alternatives.
We're not opposed to fetal tissue research per se. We're not opposed to stem cell research per se. We're opposed to fetal tissue research that uses the body parts of aborted babies. You can obtain fetal tissue from miscarriages and stillbirths and other kinds of sources that are not unethical.
The Trump administration's Department of Health and Human Services says as its review of fetal tissue research continues, nothing Dr. Collins has said should be seen as a prejudgment of the outcome of the review. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Cuba's government will remove language promoting the legalization of gay marriage from the draft of a new constitution. The language drew protests from evangelical churches and ordinary citizens. The Constitution will now be silent on the issue. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley hints at a plan for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but gives no details.
Both sides would benefit greatly from a peace agreement, but the Palestinians would benefit more, and the Israelis would risk more.
Haley, who is stepping down at the end of the month, says she has read the plan. It's expected to be released in the beginning of 2019. The Democratic Republic of the Congo prepares for its presidential election this Sunday. Some citizens fear the long-delayed vote will be skewed in favor of the ruling party. The country's president, Joseph Kabila, has hinted he will be back as president in 5 years. Pope Francis urges the world to make space for wonder and surprise this Christmas.
Lasciamoci sorprendere da Gesù in questo Natale.
During his meeting today with pilgrims, the Holy Father said God came into the world as a tiny baby. He says the Christmas season should not be focused on shopping or parties, but rather on the baby Jesus who surprises us. Coming up, as Ireland legalizes abortion, we get reaction from a pro-life advocate in the Catholic country. And Second Lady Karen Pence is ready for Christmas. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Ireland's parliament has passed historic legislation legalizing abortion in the Catholic country. Abortion is now legal up to 12 weeks. After that, it will be allowed in certain circumstances. The legislation comes after Irish voters agreed in May to change their constitution to allow abortion. Joining me now by Skype from Dublin, Ireland is Niamh O'Brien, spokesperson for Life Institute, an organization that promotes the sanctity of human life and works to protect the family. Niamh, how is the pro-life community in Ireland reacting to these new abortion laws that are about to go into effect?
I think that most people listening to the program, it will resonate with them when I say that when the Eighth Amendment was removed from the Constitution by referendum in the summer, there was a huge sense of heartbreak and sadness for the pro-life community because, we realize what we've lost. We lost something precious and powerful and beautiful. And a lot of that heartbreak, I think, was revisited this month, in the month of December, because we had this abortion bill, this very radical piece of abortion legislation going through our Dáil, our Parliament and our Senate, and is now going to be signed by the President right in the run-up to Christmas. And there's a particularly kind of poignant sadness about that because, we all know Christmas is about the birth of a very special child, the Christ child, and all of the beauty of that story, I think, and the meaning of that story. For us who normally celebrate it with such meaning, it's a lot of heartbreak in it this year that we're going to look into a Christmas and into a new year where abortion is going to be legalized in Ireland for the first time.
You made reference to the May referendum that legalized abortion. It passed by 2/3. Why do you think there was so much overwhelming support for it in your view?
Well, you see, there wasn't so much overwhelming support for abortion, and that's an important distinction. The Eighth Amendment had been made into a total bogeyman, by the media in this country, and it was the media, absolutely 100%, who won the referendum. It wasn't campaign groups, it wasn't politicians. The media have been pushing to have the Eighth Amendment removed for almost as long as I've been alive, but certainly in the last 5 years with great intensity. And many people who voted yes are horrified, for example, to find out that this legislation will allow for late-term abortion. It refuses pain relief for babies who are aborted in late-term abortion. It doesn't give parents the right to be informed if their underage daughter is undergoing an abortion, and that it allows abortion in very broad circumstances. So a lot of yes voters, I think, are finding out what's in this bill and are horrified about what's in it.
So like you say, you've heard from voters who regret their yes vote. Tell us about a video circulating that seems to indicate that people didn't fully understand what they were voting for.
When Tim Jackson, who's a great pro-life champion here in Ireland and involved in a lot of new media, went out and did vox pops on the streets explaining to people exactly what was going to be in the bill, that was going to allow for abortion and disability, that there was no pain relief for babies in late-term abortion, and many, many very other cruel and radical elements of the bill, people were horrified. And you have yes voters in that video, which I think is headed for 750,000 views, which is very, very substantial for Ireland. And they're saying, if I'd known that, I would never have voted yes. And they're saying, I regret my yes vote. And I think we're going to see a lot of that.
As of January the 1st, abortions will be free for the public, paid for by tax dollars. Are there any conscience protections for doctors and Catholic hospitals who do not want to participate in the killing of human life?
Well, that's a key question, Wyatt, and the short answer is no, there are not. And doctors and nurses, and not just, very dedicated pro-life doctors and nurses, but doctors, nurses, midwives, pharmacists, all kind of healthcare workers right across the spectrum have been up in arms about this for months. Our health minister, Simon Harris, has simply refused to meet them. 650 doctors, which is a huge proportion of the number of general practitioners here in Ireland, asked for a meeting to try to get conscientious objection properly elaborated upon in the bill. Nurses and midwives in the same numbers. Even obstetricians have come forward and said that we're deeply unhappy with the lack of the right to a conscientious objection that's in this bill. And our health minister, just wouldn't listen to them and bullied this through. So that's, it's been a huge battle even since the referendum to get the voices of pro-life doctors and nurses heard, and it's going to be something we're going to be dealing with in the new year, I think, almost immediately.
Well, we will continue to follow this and see how everything plays out. However it does play out, I'm sure the faithful will continue to pray and advocate for pro-life causes. Nev OBrien, spokesperson for Life Institute, thanks so much for your talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Second Lady Karen Pence shows off decorations at the Vice President's official residence. The theme comes from the poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
This room is really dedicated to the part of the stanza where all of the reindeer appear.
Stockings are hung by the chimney with care, 6 for the Pences and 3 for their pets. There's also a gingerbread house that weighs more than 100 pounds. The main attraction? A North Carolina fir tree that's nearly 12 feet tall. Up next, a group in Utah tells us how they're raising awareness to the dangers of pornography, and a new heartwarming revelation about the late George H.W. Bush. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. This week, the social networking site Tumblr blocked all adult content from its website. And last month, Starbucks announced its decision to start blocking pornography on its store's Wi-Fi in the new year. All of these developments underscore the growing concerns over pornography. Lauren Ashburn sat down with the co-founder of an organization that offers support to people fighting this addiction.
Joining me now from Salt Lake City, Utah, is Clay Olson, co-founder and president of Fight the New Drug, a group that seeks to raise awareness about the harmful effects of pornography. Clay, welcome to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me on, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Pornography is a taboo subject. Yet, as you have learned to stop its harmful effects, we have to change how we have conversations about it. So what does that look like?
Well, you know, for so long, this issue has been a part of our society, a part of our world for so long. But things have shifted over the years, and we need to kind of start to change the way we we talk about it, the way that we address this issue, particularly as it comes to young people, because the reality is that they're dealing with this to an intensity and scale that no generation in the history of the world has ever seen. So it's time that we kind of start to change the conversation on this topic.
Your organization, Fight the New Drug, has been around for about a decade. What are you hearing from people coming to you looking for help?
Oh, we have literally hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world reaching out, seeking help, seeking, some as young as 8 years old, and wrap your brain around that figure, wanting to know how they can overcome these compulsions, these deep-rooted habits, and we try to help them as best we can through education and awareness and some tools that can help them on the path to that kind of healing and recovery.
One of the things that you did is your new documentary series, Brain, Heart, and World, about raising awareness about the harmful effects. So what are some of the ways porn harms us as individuals and as a society?
You know, for so long, this was a topic that was primarily focused on individual opinions and beliefs, and now science has really caught up with the truth that pornography is impacting us in three main ways. It's impacting us neurologically, it's impacting us within our relationships and our capacity to love, and it's impacting us in our society and our culture. And we have worked with researchers and experts from around the world, in Germany and Japan and the United States, diving into this information, this new research that's coming out from institutions all over the world, to help package that in a way that connects with the younger generation so that we can make better and more informed decisions moving forward.
You're not alone in this. Last month at the Vatican, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development had a conference, an international one on addictions, and it included internet pornography. Internet use, screen time, such a part of our everyday lives. What do you suggest to people struggling to resist the temptation?
Well, I think people need to recognize that ultimately, people turn to pornography oftentimes to fill a void or fill kind of some other challenges that they're dealing with in their lives. And so many, when people come to us and say, we want to overcome this, we want to solve this, how can we move away from this? We want to help them address that particular issue, but we need to look at the larger scope of their life and kind of back out and kind of look at some of the vulnerabilities that are contributing to these patterns. And relationships ultimately are some of the key factors that can be either vulnerabilities or strengths in one's life. And so we help individuals build better relationships with themselves, with others around them, and with higher power.
One thing before we go, we only have a few seconds here, but the exact figure for the size of the porn industry, total sales estimated to be in the billions. You're fighting a behemoth.
Yes. This is an enormous effort, and there's a lot of energy and effort to kind of discredit and push down any sort of evidence and to kind of counter their efforts and their messages. And so it is something that we need to combine together. We need to rally together to help change the conversation, fight for real love, fight for real connection, and help people that are healing and that don't have a voice and that are being victimized.
Clay Olson, co-founder and president of Fight the New Drug. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Lauren Ashburn for that interview. And finally tonight, former President George H.W. Bush died last month at the age of 94, but we continue to learn heartwarming details about his life. It was recently revealed the 41st president sponsored a 7-year-old boy in the Philippines named Timothy. For 10 years, Bush sent money for the boy's education, meals, and activities. The former president used the pseudonym G. Walker when writing letters to Timothy. He made the donations through a Christian group called Compassion International. Pretty incredible how he was able to keep that anonymous for so many years, and just another example, of course, of his charitable work. And that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.